And hi! Hello and hi. Seeing as this is the very first video on a brand new channel, I reckon I should probably introduce it a little bit. My name is Caitlin. I use the name Korokleaves online and I am a streamer and a gaming content creator. I made this channel for two reasons. Number one being that apparently I don't have enough outlets to talk about games already. And the second one is that isolation has made me far too comfortable in my anxiety. I need to do more things that scare me and put me out of my comfort zone and put me in front of people. And so here I am. That's pretty much the whole story for me, video games and anxiety. It's strong branding. But that's what this is going to be. Most of my content on other platforms focuses on actual gameplay, but I wanted a place where I could talk about games in more depth. So, let's give that a try. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how video games deal with the subject of death. If this sounds a little bit familiar, I actually wrote a blog post about this back in October, but I wanted to rework it a little bit for this format. I know it sounds like a morbid one, especially for a first video, but stay with me, okay? When I mention death in video games, I'm not talking about game over screens. While yes, that probably is the element of life ending that we associate most with gaming, I'm actually more interested in how the theme of death and what might come after is used in this art form. Gaming is a huge industry and it is only getting bigger. Pair that with the force of social media and you have something incredibly powerful. It is much more than just a handful of well-known developers and publishers. There are also countless independent creators who can seemingly come out of nowhere and then drop a game that suddenly everyone is talking about. And then you have a subject like death, which is open to immense interpretation, creativity, and personalization. Hand that over to an enormous community of creatives, and it is no wonder that you get this incredible spectrum of art back. We'll start with games that are specifically about the ending of life and what might come after. The first game I want to talk about is Spiritfarer, which is actually the game that inspired this entire line of thinking. This game became hugely popular last year, and if you play it, you will see why. Spiritfarer presents a pretty pleasant afterlife, or maybe more accurately, a purgatory. You traverse across an ocean, visiting characterful islands and meeting and helping the very human spirits of those you come across. And you help them, working through relationship troubles, corporate strife, family fallouts, even workers' unions. All of those things that you would think would be eradicated by moving to a new plane of existence. But what this game suggests is that wherever you put a group of humans, living or dead, they're still gonna do their very human thing. It's a commentary on death that personally I have not seen done before, one that balances that ethereal concept with very down-to-earth realism. That realism also extends to the deaths themselves, because that isn't always kind. Stella, the protagonist, watches as her friends leave her one by one, dealing with things like inelegant endings, unfinished business, and goodbyes left unsaid. A lot of the time when spirits ask to be taken to the Everdoor so that they can move on, their character arcs aren't completely finished. But regardless of that, their time is still up. One spirit in particular actually never asks to be taken to the Everdoor. He literally just vanishes, and we have to pick up on what happens from context clues. Because that's how it is. Most of the time, people don't choose to leave, and sometimes there is no graceful winding down of life. Sometimes people are just gone. Rime is another game that conceptualizes the afterlife as having different stages. What this one does differently is that you, the protagonist, don't actually realize that you're dead until the very final few minutes of the game. This game is split into 5 levels, and again, most players tend to not quite clock what they are until the very end. Each level corresponds with one of the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Throughout the game, we are led to believe that actually it was our character's father that perished and that we are grieving him. You spend the game coming to terms with it, preparing for some sad realization on the protagonist's end, but ultimately his survival, only for the game to literally flip on its head and put you in the body of the father, sitting alone in his son's room, mourning him. What Rime gives us is the idea that grief comes from both sides. Of course, a father will mourn his son, but if we are conscious in death, those who pass away lose just as much, if not more. I'm gonna try and talk about a more upbeat game now, because I think we need it. So as I said, games like Spiritfarer and Rime are more like purgatories between the actual event of the death and then the moving on stage. Different games put forward different concepts, many of which are essentially life and then eternity. One of these games is Afterparty. As the game suggests, it takes place in the afterlife, specifically in hell. It actually shares a similarity with Spiritfarer in that basically if you dump enough humans in one place, no matter where it is, they're still going to bring their way of life with them, even if it just adapts a bit to make it a bit more fiery. The goal of this game, genuinely, is to outdrink Satan so that you can win a second chance of life and leave hell. Before you get to that though, there's a bunch of other quests, mini games, and choices that you have to make because this is a multiple endings game. It's still hell, and humans aren't having a great time overall, but actually the whole torture thing is more of a 9 to 5. Outside of the demons' working hours, humans can do what they want. They go to bars, they throw parties, they use Hell's social media site, Bicker, and they even befriend the demons that torture them during the workday. Again, still not somewhere that you want to end up for eternity, but it's less of a horrifying damnation and more of an inconvenience. Death isn't really death, it's just a transfer to a different way of living. And if you play your cards right, it's even reversible. Naturally, when games are about death, they tend to show the perspective of the other side, but this isn't always the case. There is a game called The Stillness of the Wind, which follows Talma, who is very much still alive and on Earth. It's a peaceful game, but with some sinister undertones that are few and far between in the form of Talma's nightmares, as we follow her and her life winds down to a close. What struck me about this game was the lack of control. You can choose how you want to spend each day, whether it's gardening, cooking, taking care of your animals, or exploring. But whatever you do, the days keep getting shorter, Talma tires more easily, her farm slowly falls into disrepair, and eventually the sun rises and Talma does not appear outside of her front door. And the game ends. The Stillness of the Wind treats death as exactly what it is, something that is inevitable, cannot be stopped, and cannot be slowed. However, it is not something to be immobilized by. While it's still within your grasp, life will continue to move and take you with it, even if it's just getting up in the morning to feed the goats. So those are some games that are specifically about death. Now I'm going to cover some games where it's not the main theme, but they still cover the topic in their own way. The presence or even the acknowledgement of death varies greatly from game to game. With the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons, players remarked the presence of something called a Western-style stone, which is blatantly a gravestone. Death is never mentioned directly, I don't think, but even the fact that it was acknowledged in a game like Animal Crossing kind of had a lot of people taken aback. Because no one really wants to think about the possibility that there would be a need for a gravestone in a game like Animal Crossing. In contrast, you have something like Ori and the Blind Forest, which goes beyond gently implying that life will come to an end, and instead breaks your heart in the first 10 minutes by giving you a character to fall in love with, and then killing them off instantly. Given the art style and score, it is done beautifully, but painfully, as we have to watch Ori mourn. This game isn't specifically about death. In fact, it's actually about saving the forest. But in order for something to be saved, you first have to have a threat. And Ori and the Blind Forest made sure that we understood the threat from the off. You also have games like Breath of the Wild, where the overall goal is to defeat evil and save the kingdom. The Zelda series has had no issue with killing off characters in the past. I mean, look at Wind Waker, where despite the fact that the final battle is already won, the King of Hyrule admits that he has no place outside of his kingdom, and instead, he drowns with it. Breath of the Wild quite literally went ahead of the game and killed off a bunch of the main characters before we even join the story as the player. They exist entirely as spirits or through memories, and even though we know what their fate is, we still feel the loss of them, even though we meet them or remember them far too late. And it's not only Link, the protagonist, who has this loss weighing on his life. As you travel around Hyrule, half of the characters you meet will recount stories of friends and family members who have gone missing, died in accidents, or been killed by assassins or monsters. Most of Hyrule stands empty or in ruin. It's loss that we, as the players, weren't around to see, but feel all the more. And because of that, we know and we understand the level of the threat that we have to face. And yet, there's this quiet determination that moves you and the other characters forwards. Because their lives are still worth living, even burdened by grief and danger and the memory of what used to be. They're still worth living. What I'm trying to say in this video is that every game has its own unique take on death. Some are artistic musings on the possibility of something more. Some tackle the difficulty of being left behind, and some look to make peace with eventual nothingness. Some drop you into death right off the bat. Others decide to make it a shattering revelation right at the end. One thing that they do seem to agree on is that what comes after death, no matter what side of the veil you are on, isn't always going to be an ethereal experience. In fact, more times than not, it won't be. Whether it is the actual dying part or the realization that the afterlife is still going to be populated with humans, and their very human problems and their very human tendencies. I will always stand by the statement that games are an art form, and one with incredible storytelling power. Creatives can take an abstract subject like death and pull it apart in 1,000 different ways with 1,000 different attitudes and all of the artistic license that they want. But it's comforting, I think, To know that wherever we go, humans will look at something big and scary and unknown, and they'll treat it with hope and wonder. So, that's what I think. Hey, so thank you so much for checking this out. Out of the comfort zone for sure for me, but I really hope you enjoyed it. Not to be incredibly cliche, but if you did like it, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a like, maybe subscribe if you'd like to see what my brain spits out next, and maybe even leave a comment, maybe telling me about your favourite video game, and maybe how it deals with death. I also make content on a bunch of other platforms, including Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I will link them all in the description. And hey, an extra thank you to you if you stuck around to the final few seconds. See you next time.